Welcome, everyone. My name is Karen Steelman, and I'm the science director here at Shumla Archaeological Research and Education Center. We do these lunch and learns once a month. We have different people give them, and I'm really excited and honored to get to talk to you guys today. I'm actually giving you a sort of a little bit longer version of a presentation from the Society for American Archaeology meeting that was in Chicago a couple of weeks ago. And this is kind of exciting for me because I lost my voice at the conference and I couldn't actually give my talk. I had to actually have somebody else read it. So this is like, I get to give it for real. So this is exciting. We're going to be sharing some new data that we have for Pecos river style rock art and some new dates for that. And I'm going to talk less today about sort of how we get the radiocarbon dates, and I'm just going to talk about the dates that we do have in this new data. And just on my title slide here, you know, I have a picture of a anthropomorph that's just showing you the top portion of him. And he has these red deer antlers, and there are black dots on the ends of the tines. But this is a figure at Halo Shelter, and I was actually fortunate to be out at shelter for field work the past 2 days. And this is a figure that we don't have data for yet, but we will be radiocarbon dating this figure. And that's part of what we're trying to do, is to know how old this rock art is that covers a fairly large region of Southwest Texas. And so the Lower Pecos, if you're not familiar with where we're located, we're in Southwest Texas, and the archaeological region that we study is at the sort of confluence of the Pecos River and the Devils River with the Rio Grande. And we know that there are over 350 rock art sites and more. Those are just the ones we know about in the Texas side of the border. And there are other sites that go into Mexico as well. And this region has some of the most complex and compositionally intricate prehistoric rock art in the world. And it's the reason that our research center is located here in Southwest Texas, and it's the reason I'm here studying the art. So we're very fortunate to get to do that. We are initiating a new research project with a research design, and we're calling it the Hearthstone Project. And this project is partially funded by the National Science Foundation and the National Endowment for the Humanities, along with many private foundations and donors and supporters. And this really makes this work possible. And the reason it's called the Hearthstone Project is that the project has 3 branches of study. So like a kamal or a traditional Mesoamerican griddle on the hearth, that has 3 legs of support, the Hearthstone Project has 3 branches of study: formal art analysis, archaeological science, and indigenous knowledge. And it's really this interdisciplinary research that's the way forward. At that Society for American Archaeology conference, Carolyn Boyd actually gave a presentation where she talked about our research design. And so I don't have that built into this as much, but I will say, I'm just going to talk about it off the cuff here just a little bit, in that we're wanting to focus on some specific sites, some specific murals, and we are wanting to really understand how the paint was applied to the wall, the application methods that were used, the use of space, but also the order in which the paint was applied to the wall. So that just like in an archaeological excavation, you have stratigraphy of deposited layers of soil. On a rock art panel, you have paint that was applied to the wall, whether it was all done maybe at one time as a mural or over time. But if you take microscopy data, we have a little digital microscope that we can hold up against the wall and then see the paint layer under high magnification. we can say, well, this color is on top of this other color. The archaeologists that we work with then can feed that into basically like a flowchart type software and create something called a Harris matrix, which just gives us the entire structure of that panel. And we want to do that. And then we want to use that information to help us figure out where, if we want to know how old these panels are, what are the best locations for us to take little tiny samples so that we can know the age of this panel. Which figures do we want to radiocarbon date so that we get the most information for the panel? And then the most important thing I think of this project is because we are understanding how the murals are put together, the archaeologists are working with creating sort of artistic renderings or figure, drawings, reproductions of these panels. And we, Carolyn Boyd and Phil Daring, our archaeology director, are going to be taking these to Indigenous communities and talking to them about the interpretive nature of these panels. And this is just so wonderful to me that we're doing all of this together as a team. And it's really this team-based approach that I just absolutely love working with. I'm going to talk a lot about the radiocarbon dating, though, of the project, because this Lunch and Learn was how old is Lower Pecos rock art. And so I'll really be focusing on this archaeological science branch of the Hearthstone project today. We are initiating this new radiocarbon dating campaign for Lower Pecos pictographs. We still have a lot of gaps in our knowledge of how old Lower Pecos rock art is. And from previous research conducted by Marvin Rowe, who was my PhD advisor at Texas A&M many moons ago, we do know that Pecos River style pictographs were created sometime between 1,000 to 4,000 years old. And this is based on some legacy dates when the laboratory was developing this technique for dating rock art. But we know that we need new data because we want to be able to ask some very specific research questions, such as how old are deer headdress figures and how does that compare to rabbit ear headdresses? So like that in my title slide, I had that one specific attribute of that anthropomorph. And we see that as a repeated motif across the landscape. Were all of those painted at the same time period, or did that way of painting persist for several thousands of years? And the only way to know how to answer that question is to target these specific attributes across the landscape and see if what we get, how old is this? And to do this, though, it requires some precise data with smaller plus or minus error ranges. But with improvements in our techniques and in our experimental design, we're really now able to get that data. And so how do we radiocarbon date pictographs? Well, we use two different methods. In the first method, we extract organic material in the paint layer. So this is a cross section, so a little bitty tiny chip of paint that you're looking at sideways. And so you can see the limestone rock underneath, and then you can see that black paint layer. And then you can see kind of a cream colored mineral accretion that coats that paint sample. And so to radiocarbon the rock art, we use two different methods. And in that first one, we're getting organics directly from that paint layer. And we're using something called plasma oxidation, followed by AMS measurement to get a direct date for the painting. In the second method, though, we obtain indirect ages by radiocarbon dating that mineral accretion that you see that's both over and under the paint layer. So that's in that yellow and green kind of marked place in the picture. And we can get indirect ages on the calcium oxalate because that has carbon in it. And the carbon of that mineral accretion is the age of when that accretion formed. And so we can get minimum and maximum ages for a painting as well. And this is just great because we're using two different methods to date a single event. So again, in that first method, plasma oxidation was developed in the 1990s by Marvin Rowe and John Russ. And that technique that we use uses electrically excited oxygen to convert organic material in the sample to carbon dioxide and water. And so these pictures here, this is the lab here in Comstock at Shumla. This is a new instrument that we built in the here recently. So we've got this new instrument here that we've built in the last couple of years. This was supported by a National Science Foundation grant to build this. And what happens is you put your paint sample here in these glass chambers, and there are copper electrodes on either side of this, and you fill this with a small pressure of pure oxygen. And then you turn on the electricity. It's connected to RF generator, and they glow. And so that's why it's called a plasma, because it glows. And that reacts with the organic material in the paint sample and converts it to carbon dioxide and water, which we freeze in this glass tube down here. It's frozen in liquid nitrogen. And then we'll use a blowtorch to seal off that tube. So we have this glass tube of carbon that is from the paint sample itself. So it's the organic carbon from the paint that's here. And then we collaborate with the Center for Accelerator Mass Spectrometry at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and they give us the isotope age. But right here in Comstock at the Shumla Labs, we have this technique for processing these paint samples. I would say also that this is a new instrument in that we're able to analyze 10 samples at once. And so that really increases our efficiency. It allows us to do more research because before we had one of these where we would just do one sample at a time. And it takes about the same amount of time to do these 10 as it did the one. So this is really increasing our ability to do good research. With plasma oxidation, you're only extracting the organic material, and any inorganic minerals that are part of the sample, like iron oxides or anything like that, stays as a solid here. So the only thing that goes into this tube is from the organic carbon from the binders and the vehicles and the paint layer. Now, the second method we use for dating pictographs provides minimum and maximum ages. So overlying and underlying mineral accretions that are associated with paint layers often contain this mineral, calcium oxalate. And because I'm a chemist, I have to give you a chemical formula. Here it is, calcium oxalate. And you can see that that has carbon in it. And this carbon is from when these layers formed from carbon that was in the air. And so we can radiocarbon date this lower layer and get a maximum age, and we can radiocarbon date this overlying layer and get a minimum age. There are several steps that go into the processing of these accretion samples. First, you have to actually physically dissect the sample under magnification. And then we do some things called like infrared spectroscopy to make sure that there's really calcium oxalate there. We have to clean the samples in phosphoric acid to remove any carbonates. And we actually put these samples in that plasma instrument as well, because we want to make sure that there's no organic contamination in those layers, that we're ending up with a purified sample of just this. And so we can radiocarbon date just this carbon to get the age of those. So get those minimum and maximum ages. So, you know, I guess it was last year, we recently published a paper in the Journal of Archaeological Science where we used these two different methods to determine the age of rock art at Eagle Cave here in the Lower Pecos in Texas. And I would just say that's what you want to do when you want to make sure you're getting the right answer. I always use the analogy of it's like getting a second test at the doctor. If both tests come back with the same result, you can be pretty sure that the results are correct. And that's what we want to do, is we want to, you know, make sure that we're getting the correct answers. So at Eagle Cave, we have a fairly complete picture just from these three samples. So here's the data. And the blue here are the direct paint dates from these three samples. And then So all those statistically agree. The underneath accretion layers in green are older, and the overlying accretion layers here in kind of orange, I guess that is, are younger. But to my knowledge, sample 1' right here is the only pictograph sample in the world that has been dated with a minimum, a direct, and a maximum age. So that was really exciting to get that data. I will say, though, that if you're looking at those direct date paints, dates on the paint layer, you can see that they have fairly large error bars. And that's because these carbon samples are small, but we're able to get a tighter age range by averaging these 3 direct dates. Because we do have preliminary microscopy data at Eagle Cave that shows that those figures are interwoven and they're part of a mural composition that was all painted at the same time. We know that these are not 3 separate samples, but they're actually subsamples from one painting. And so this average gives us a tighter age range for the production of the art at Eagle Cave. And it's really this combination of microscopy data that our archaeologists are doing and the radiocarbon dating that we're doing in the chemistry lab that is this interdisciplinary research that we're continuing to do at other sites in the Lower Pecos as part of the Hearthstone project. I know I showed a fancy graph here, but when you average these dates, those 3 dates, you get this number here. And then we calibrate that to convert it into sort of a years ago. And so this sample is 3690 to 3370, or this mural at Eagle Cave is somewhere between 3690 and 3370 years old, or years before present. So that's how we got that. Okay, and also last year, we were in COVID and we had a lot of time in front of our computers. And so we reviewed all of the legacy dates for Lower Pecos pictographs. And we published this paper. We also reported a handful of new dates that had been previously unpublished. And in this paper, we also kind of highlight the advantages of this plasma oxidation technique, which has now been around, believe it or not, for over 30 years. One thing I'd like to stress is that our laboratory is doing things to make sure we're getting accurate and reliable results. And the most important of the things that we do to make sure that we're doing things okay is that we process control samples of unpainted rock that are directly adjacent to the paintings. And those get processed exactly like a paint sample would to ensure that the rock itself does not contain contamination. And that's one of the most important things that you need to do in your laboratory procedure if you're wanting to date rock art. We've also processed and dated standards of known age, including historic pictographs. And then, as I just discussed, we've been dating 2 different materials, organics and oxalates, using 2 different procedures to verify our results. So after kind of reviewing the legacy dates, until 2 weeks ago, these were the only 4 ages that I tried. Well, it's been 4 weeks ago. Sorry, this was a presentation I did in Chicago 2 weeks ago. 4 weeks ago, until 4 weeks ago. So y'all are learning very new stuff here. This is new data you're going to just get to see here in just a minute. These were the only 4 ages that I trusted for Pecos River style. The 3 dates for Eagle Cave are sort of in this average here. And then we had 3 additional dates for 3 other sites in the region. So this graph here has 6 radiocarbon dates hidden kind of within it. This is what we knew until a month ago. And I'm going to show you some pictures of where those samples came from that were on that graph. So one of them is from Black Cave Annex. And just showing you some of the rock art here. And that's really what we're going to transition to now, is not talking about methods. We're just going to look at some of the imagery and then the dates that we have for that imagery. So this is at Black Cave Annex. And within the box there is a deer. And that black deer had this age here. So these, I've got them in a little bit different units, but this is in AD, so calendar age for this deer. So that was one of those points on that graph I showed you a minute ago. Okay, and so now one of the other dates on that graph was from this site. We call it the Frost Feline site, and you can kind of see it's close kind of to the Vega. And you can trying to give you some context here, but if you can see the rock art on the wall there in the background, and here it is. I think I have D-stretch on here. Yeah, here we go. Maybe one more. So there's sort of two, I would almost call them therianthropes. They're sort of human animal combinations with cat characteristics facing each other. Oh, here, this is the one I like. You can see good. This is this D-stretch enhancement that we use to help us see the imagery. We have the age up there. So it's a BC date. So this one's older than the one I just showed you at Black Cave, quite a bit older. Okay, and then another date that we had, this is not Pecos River style actually, so this was actually not on the graph, but I stuck this in because it was a new date, was for this zigzag figure. So there is a scratched in letter P graffiti on top of it, but you can see the red zigzag there in the background. And then this is the age. Okay, and then what's really cool is if you zoom in on that zigzag, you can see that there was scratched incised lines, but that the paint was applied after the lines were created because the paint is inside the incised lines. And so then that date on that zigzag also gives us a minimum age of 205 BC for those incised lines. So that's really interesting to have that indirect age on those incised lines. But at this same site where the zigzag is, there is a Pecos River style image of a sort of a human-like figure. We would say he has a U-shaped head. He has sort of two protrusions coming off of his head. And here again, we have an older age in the BC, 1880 to 1615 BC. So what I'm showing you is just this imagery that was dated, that was on that graph. I didn't show you pictures of Eagle Cave earlier. I just sort of talked about the importance of using these two different methods at Eagle Cave. And so, but here's that shelter to give you a sense of scale. And then the most sort of known image at the site is this really tall human-like figure with a rabbit ear and sort of what we call speech breath coming out of his mouth. It's up very high. You can see the person holding the scale. They're standing on the ground, but they have their hand fully extended. I believe that figure is about 5 feet tall. Oh, and I've got you close up so you can kind of see. See, you've got this. Oh yeah, I've got them highlighted there. You've got a black rabbit ear with a red outline, and then a yellow sort of ovoid protrusion that we call rabbit ear with a white outline. So it's just beautiful, beautiful imagery. The three samples that we talked about dating in Eagle Cave, I know it's hard to see, but just kind of showing you there to the right of that large figure. So the large figure that I showed you is right here. And then we actually didn't directly date him, but we dated these three other figures. This is a badly decomposed rabbit ear anthropomorph here as well. So this is that graph I showed you where it had 6 dates. And so I just showed you what all of those images look like. And again, until 4 weeks ago, that was all I knew. Now, one thing I would like to say is this is amazing. We have Pecos River style that goes back to about 1400 years ago here to, maybe 3,700 years ago. This is a type of art that persisted for a very long time, which is just amazing. But let's talk about some new data that actually extends that. Jackrabbit shelter. So I'm going to give you this new data that we have for Jackrabbit shelter. It's located in a side canyon off the Pecos River. And the dates are for 5 different paintings at the site. We've not finished the microscopy data. We're actually going to go back next month and do some additional microscopy data at the site to determine all the paint layering. So I'm not going to show you a weighted average of these results because I'm not quite sure if they're all interconnected yet or not. But these 5 dates are remarkably consistent at about 4,700 years old. So that's a Cal BP just means before present, so years ago. So about 4,700 years ago. And that's just amazing. So I'm going to show you that imagery. So this is, again, I'm showing you this enhancement to make it a little easier to see. We dated this large red figure here. Those spans about 5 meters across the panel. We've been kind of calling it a monster fish because he has sort of fish-like characteristics, and it has fangs, and it actually has like black feathers along the back. And then another sample that we dated at the site was this striped body, red and black striped body anthropomorph with this, what we would call a single rabbit ear. He actually has an interesting accoutrement here that comes off that also has a rabbit sort of head. But this is one of those 5 dates that I just showed you at 4,700 years old. We also dated this polychrome anthropomorph that has red feet. So you can see the red feet down here. And for scale, this figure is about 1 meter tall. And then we dated this black anthropomorph that's approximately human-like figure that's about 1 meter tall. And we also dated this polychrome anthropomorph that's also about 1.5 meters tall. So I'm just kind of telling you that because those pictures aren't exactly the same scale. And what was interesting about these 2 figures is we did have 2 legacy dates for these figures that they had been previously radiocarbon dated by Rowe. But when we went back and read the literature, Rowe had described problems with laboratory contamination with these samples. They did some mathematical corrections and they got an average date of 4155. That's radiocarbon years before present. That's a radiocarbon unit, just years old. And they got this result, but for the other sample, they were only able to provide an estimate of greater than 3,400 for the polychrome anthropomorph. So we wanted to redate these figures and see if we got similar results. And we did, which was really pretty exciting. We obtained ages of 4,200 radiocarbon years BP, which it translates to that 4,700 years ago. I know that's confusing some, but this is very consistent with the legacy dates, the results we got, and we were very excited about that. Also, in the same canyon, just downstream from Jackrabbit is a site called Jaguar Shelter. And we dated 4 different paintings at Jaguar. And then we also dated a date on a figure at a site that's located at the mouth of the canyon. So we were looking at 3 sites in the same canyon. And at Jaguar, the dates are also remarkably consistent at about 4,700 radiocarbon years BP, or that translates to 5,500 years ago. And this is significant. This is exciting. This had my heart racing for 2 days when we got this data back, because these are the oldest ages that we have obtained for Pecos River style pictographs. So I'd like to show you this imagery. So here's some of the imagery at Jaguar Shelter. We dated this polychrome anthropomorph. It has what Carolyn would term speech breath coming out from its mouth. And it's surrounded by this single pole ladder shape, which we see all across the landscape. This figure is about 45 centimeters long-wise, just for scale. Another figure that we dated at Jaguar is this anthropomorph with crenellations and torches. So we dated this large figure here, but we also dated this sort of attendant figure here that's in superimposition with it. And again, we got those very consistent ages. So those are two of the samples that are the paintings that we dated. And then this anthropomorph that is holding torches in both hands. And I'm not going to talk about the interpretive part of this. I just want to show you what the imagery looks like. But this is all very exciting to archaeologists because they are understanding and seeing these repeated motifs across the landscape. Just really quickly, the one figure that was at the mouth of the canyon is here. He's almost identical to another figure that is at Jaguar. But here, you've got that initial graph that I showed you. And then here we have this new data and new data. And so this pushes back the age of Pecos River style to about 5,500 years ago. We are in the process of dating oxalates. These are the dates I showed you for Jackrabbit and Jaguar are direct paint dates, but we are in the process of getting some minimum and maximum ages to verify these results. And we're going back in May to get some microscopy data at these sites. But we're very excited about this progress that we're making, what we're learning. And as we date additional sites in the Lower Pecos, we're going to learn even more. Just for those of you, I know some of you I saw people that I recognize, and I know some of you are follow Shumla, but for those of you that maybe this is your first interaction with our nonprofit research center, we've got a site that has different blog posts that you can read about. There's a special blog post on the Hearthstone project that we're currently conducting as well. We have an active social media presence on Facebook and Instagram, and the entire staff helps with this content. But I will say Veronica Hackett really does a great job with all of our social media. And we want to share the information that we're learning, what the research efforts that we're doing in the field in the laboratory with you. And I just want to thank all the staff at Shumla. This is really a collaborative effort. And I'm just going to open this up to questions. So thank you.
Karen, this is Kelly Timmons.
Hi, Kelly.
Hey, I was just reading a article about pictographs, and I was wondering if the what you just said, the
accretion.
I keep forgetting the word. Is that something that could possibly use to date the pictographs? I mean, petroglyphs.
Petroglyphs, yeah. So, there are a lot of people who are doing experimental work to determine the age of petroglyphs. It's very difficult because the act of making a carving is removing something instead of adding something. Mm-hmm. So, I'm a radiocarbon gal, and I really like it when there's something that they added and I can radiocarbon date that thing. Mm-hmm. But the really interesting thing geologically about these, mineral accretions, if you go to a site or you see these pictures and it's hard to sometimes make up the imagery and people say, oh, they're faded. Well, the pigments are iron and manganese. They're minerals that don't fade. They're bright, but because they're obscured by these accretions that form on the top of them, it's hard to see them sometimes. What I like about these mineral accretions is it's something that's being added, and that accretion has carbon in it. And so I know that I can, radiocarbon is sort of the most reliable of, I would say, all the dating methods. I don't think anybody would argue with that. Even if you're a uranium thorium person, I still think you'd say radiocarbon is more reliable. And because we've just got more research on it. So yes, if you have a carving that had an accretion on it, you could use this to date that. I'm actually really interested. I mean, there are some places where I would like to try to do that, but it's like a whole nother research grant and a whole nother project to do. So if I can just learn how to clone myself into about 5 or 6 of me and have one work on this thing and one work on this other thing. But yeah, I think there's real potential for oxalate dating. I'm in collaboration with another scientist named John Russ, and also some of the Australians who are working on oxalate dating. And we're hoping to collaborate on some of that work.
Thank you.
Robin, did you have a question? Well, you're on mute, Robin.
Okay. We had a friend of mine and I had a wonderful visit to the Myers Spring ranch with Vicki Saturday. And since we've gone, of course, I have more questions. But I have a question about something you also mentioned. And that was when they lay down the paints, they do black, red, and then yellow, right?
We think that that's true for Pecos River style. So, there's different styles of rock art in the region. And all the pictures I showed you today are Pecos River style.
Okay. So my question is, so for example, at Myers Spring, the yellow sun that's to the right of the Thunderbird, why, I don't even know how to pray. So if it was black, then red, then yellow, why do we only see the yellow?
Well, so for one thing, that site is not what we would call Pecos River style.
Oh, okay, sorry.
It's a region, but most of the visible art at that site is historic art that is much more recent. We don't have any dates for that site, but because of the imagery that is depicted, you have riders on horseback, you have sometimes churches and things like that. So we know that art is probably post 1600. Some of it maybe even much more recent than that. So that ordering that Vicki was talking about, really the only thing that we know is that we see that in Pecos River style art. We have not looked at the historic art. I mean, that would be a fun research thing to look at paint layering historic rock art as well. The amazing thing about living here and getting to study this is that it's such a rich area archaeologically, because there are actually 3 other styles of art that we haven't even talked about in the region. But yeah, I mean, sometimes I will say colors, as far as visibility, and you're talking about being able to see things, sometimes certain colors kind of pop out more. A lot of it has to do with the color of the background of the rock as well. So I'll mute again, Robin.
Right, no. It's the other Robin.
The other Robin. Okay.
Sorry. It's okay, Rob.
We're both on each corner. Okay, I have a dating question, okay?
Okay.
It was very difficult for me to explain to 9th graders the difference between BCE and BP and BC.
Yeah.
BP is before present, but that should change every year.
Okay, so it doesn't, because we set time 0 as 1950. So we don't change it. So let me explain that graph. Can I pull up that graph and talk about it just for a second?
Yeah. And I know it's got to do with the radiation stuff from nuclear.
Yeah.
testing.
So, well, my screen is frozen right now, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this, but I'm not going to pull it up, but I'll say a few things about that, about the units on radiocarbon dating. So archaeologists talk about, I had that unit RCYBP, radiocarbon years before present, and that is the true measurement we get when we do the isotope measurement. And it comes from kinetics data. We're using just how fast it decays. So kinetics is time. And so that is a unit that sort of archaeologists and radiocarbon people throw around. But when I'm talking to the public, I probably shouldn't always use that unit because it's pretty meaningless as far as calendar ages are concerned. So what we do is we do something called calibration. And what we've done is we've taken tree rings and we've radiocarbon dated like every 10 years on the tree rings. And we do a conversion where we take this raw measurement that I get from the isotope measurement and I convert that and I compare that to the tree ring data to get a true calendar age. I personally, because I'm sort of, I'm a chemist that works in the archaeological world, I kind of like BC and AD because I grew up with just sort of the Gregorian calendar, and that makes sense to me. But a lot of people who work in sort of prehistoric archaeology like the unit Cal BP, which is years ago, years before present. And so I kind of had a mixed match because I was stealing slides from different PowerPoints to put this together. But when I said 5,500 years ago, that really is the calibrated years ago. That's not my raw measurement that has any kind of unusual weird thing that's not linear. And it does have to do with the sunspot solar activity on the sun, because carbon-14 is produced from radiation that interacts with our atmosphere. And it has to do with things like magnetic field and all kinds of things. And so you have to calibrate a date. When we get our raw measurement, that's not super useful. You have to calibrate it against that tree ring data to get something that is a true calendar. So I don't know that that answers your question.
No, yeah, you answered it perfectly. It was very difficult when I was teaching to have taught for 30 years, and I'd have to change dates on some of my handouts for the kids because they would have questions about, well, wait, it says this, but it really means something else. So it's much easier to go with the BCAD.
I think so when I'm talking with
anyway.
people. When I'm talking to, say, a chemistry freshman in college or something, I can talk about things like if you do a blood test and you do a doctor, they're not, measuring how much glucose is in your blood. They're measuring some kind of electrical signal, and they have to convert that electrical signal to a concentration unit. And that's what we're doing. We're taking that raw measurement and converting it to a measurable unit. And so, the glucose meter just does it for you, right? And it tells you that it's, I forget what the units are on glucose, something deciliter, but it's the amount of sugar in your blood. But that's not the raw measurement. That instrument has a calibration in it that takes that raw electrical measurement and converts it to a unit. And so because radiocarbon people are used to talking about those raw measurements, sometimes it can get confusing. But we should say that like 5,500 years ago, or, calibrated age.
Karen, you've got a couple of questions in the chat. Do you want to take a look?
Let me see here.
And then it looks like Greg has a question after that.
Okay, somebody asked if I had any comment on the announcement of the human footprints at White Sands. I think that they're doing some great research on that, and I think it's really interesting research. I think it's very exciting. They're using some techniques that I read about, but because I don't practice those techniques, it's really hard to know. But I know that all the people who work in that field know that all the laboratory work was done correctly and it is valid. The problem is that I will say that those techniques do sometimes tend to give older ages because of some of the quirks with those techniques. And so it would be really great for, I'm hoping for them to continue to research that and maybe get some more independent verification, because that's such an important find if those dates are accurate. Let's see. Somebody asked which Indigenous groups advise on interpretation and what kinds of oral traditions or other factors inform their interpretations. Is there overlap between them or divergences? So I'll say that, we're talking about rock art that now we know is 5,500 years old. And so this is rock art that is, not created by any current indigenous group. It doesn't mean that they're not related. It doesn't mean that they don't have shared stories, but it does make direct interpretation difficult. But what some of our archaeologists, our Shumla's founder, Carolyn Boyd, has done some amazing sort of ethnographic and analogy type of work, where she's looked at groups in central Mexico and looked at, there's a field where they talk about the archaic core of beliefs that are shared among lots of different indigenous groups today. And this idea that there was a core of beliefs that were shared, and then other groups, there's as groups separated or became different. And again, I'll caveat with, I'm a chemist and I don't do interpretation myself. But if you look at the way that she has done that work, it's very scientific. It's very looking at things that are common. And that's where we're making the interpretive things, where we're seeing that this symbol has got a core symbol that has been used by people to mean something similar for thousands of years. And it's something that everyone recognizes. The groups that they're going to take the murals to are in Mexico. We're working with some ethnographers that work in Mexico, primarily the Huichol, and that's what they're doing with that. Let me see what else we got here. I hope I answered that question. And then, oh yeah, do you interpret the difference between rabbit ears and deer horns? And that's a good question, because I was just throwing these terms out because we have to have a name for something. Just like you have the name circle to describe what a circle looks like, you have to have a name to describe a shape. So the headdresses that I was calling rabbit ears, they may not be rabbit ears. We just call them that. We try to not use interpretive names sometimes for those shapes, but sometimes the name sticks and it's hard to get away from that. They could be mule deer ears, or they could be something else, but it's that sort of ovoid, sort of oblate, I think is the name of it, oblate shape that comes off of those. So, we don't have a difference. I mean, deer antlers are pretty distinct and pretty clear. So those we can tell. Who had a question, Emil?
Greg has a question. If you still have your question, if you would unmute Greg.
I still have a question.
Okay.
Out of curiosity, I know in the early days, my radiocarbon knowledge is a little bit dated. They used to require something like several ounces to get a good date, to get the signal higher than the noise.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of sample sizes are you using nowadays?
Yeah, so when Libby developed radiocarbon dating in the 60s, they had to have like 2 grams or something of material. And I'll nerd out for a minute. When I was in Chicago, I got to go to the Field Museum, and they had this big Egyptian barge wooden structure thing. And it was one of the first samples Libby ever radiocarbon dated, because he could take, part of a wood plank and destroy it, which is not what we want to do. We really do not do those kind of things anymore. The technique that I'm talking about, where we do the isotope measurement, that accelerator mass spectrometry that we do the isotope measurement with, needs anywhere from, I love to have 100 micrograms of carbon, but I'll take 25, and that's micrograms. So that's like times 10 to the -6. So that's like a 0, a decimal, and 5 zeros. And then, 2 5. So like nothing, like small, very small amounts. As far as paint samples, we're talking about the white part of my little bitty pinky fingernail. So maybe something about half the size of a dime, maybe sometimes smaller than that. And we are very conscious. It's not something that is easy to do. We make very decisions that we're all a part of about whether we're going to take a sample or not. But these sites are falling apart. It's the term spalling. They're flaking and exfoliating off the wall. And so we are able to take samples that are going to naturally fall away from the wall, but usually they're about the half the size of a dime.
Thank you. It's your sample sizes are amazing. What you're doing could never have been done without the development of techniques to use those kinds of samples. Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. I see another question here in the chat. How long do you process your samples at Comstock in your electric machine? So it takes 2 days to go through that process. But we usually have another day on the front end. So if I have a sample, I have to look at it under the microscope, I have to wash it, I have to look at it. There's all these things that we do. But when it's getting ready to load into that plasma oxidation instrument, what we do is we have a day where we clean the system so that we make sure that there's no prior contamination from the previous set of samples. And so that's 1 day of cleaning. And then we load the paint samples. I let it pump out all the air because it's all vacuum systems. So I go to home and eat my dinner and sleep while it's pumping out. And then I come back the next morning, and then we run a whole day of processing those paint samples. So it's a full 2 days of samples. We're really lucky. We have like interns that will come and work with me. So it's not just me in there doing it. So I have lab partners. So.
Karen.
Yes, Jim.
About 10 years ago or so, Jack Skiles and I visited Jaguar and photographed all of Jaguar. And I think the same day we also visited Jack Rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
And Jack mentioned to me, he saw through his years, he saw many pictographic panels around the Lower Pecos. He told me he thought that the paintings in Jaguar especially were very, very old, in his opinion.
Well,
He proved right, didn't he?
Yeah, that's a nice story. I always thought they were kind of too, but I couldn't have told you why I thought that or anything. I knew it was a very important site for us to know the age of, just because of the imagery that's in it. That's so wonderful. I'm gonna have to remember that. Yes. Your thing says Brunson Legacy. I can't see you very well. Oh, you're on mute, sir.
How's that?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Hear me? Yeah, I'm Greg Brunson.
Hi.
I'm a layman in a bunch of academics, it looks like here, but
No.
I'm trying to understand in summary. I wrote down Eagle Cave
Mm-hmm.
at 3690 BP.
Okay.
And Jaguar at 5500.
Mm-hmm.
That's a 1500 year discrepancy.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say it's the same culture or the same peoples?
So it's definitely people with a shared iconographic cosmovision of sort of recognizing symbols, using the same symbols over and over again. So archaeologically in this region, there are deposits that go back probably about 12,000 to 13,000 years old. That's what's found in the ground. And that's one of the reasons this region is so important archaeologically, is because we have very early occupation of this area that continues all the way up into the historic period. Now, how much migration and movement occurred? It's difficult because when you look at the dirt archaeology, there's change. There's some technology change as far as stone tool points, But as far as the basketry and the sandals and a lot of the stuff, it's all the same kind of material because it was the resources that were available here. It was the plants that were available here. And so people were doing, you know, earth oven cooking and things like that because that's what you do when you live here. The rock art is so informative for us because it is got more than just bones and stone tools. It actually has imagery of the belief system of the peoples who lived here. And it appears that we may have sub-styles. We're not sure yet. That's something that we've got to continue to do. But now that we can radiocarbon date specific motifs and different styles and different sites on the landscape, we're going to be able to just say the stuff that all looks kind of similar, that's 1,000 to 4,000 years old, we might be able to narrow that down and say, oh, well, there was this one time period here and they did this kind of thing here, or they did this other thing here. We're not sure yet. That's what this project is going to answer. I would make a comparison of if you see Egyptian art, you look at it and you go, hey, that's Egyptian art, but it might be New Kingdom or Old Kingdom. And if you know something about Egyptian art, you might be able to put it into one of those groupings. We're just at the point where we're saying, hey, this is all Pecos River style art. It's all art that looks kind of the same. It's all in the same region. But now that we can get radiocarbon dates on specific things and specific attributes and iconographic images, we'll start to be able to answer that question of, you know, was there something that like all of a sudden appeared at a certain time point? We don't know that yet, but that's what we're trying to do. But yes, it's basically, I mean, the desert population that lived here that was creating this art for thousands of years.
One of the reasons I ask that is that I've been up on Cedar Mesa, Utah, with the Anasazi pictographs, and there are great similarities in imagery. And of course, the Anasazi are dated what, 1230, something like that. And so I'm just wondering if you've made that connection yet between those peoples. The shaman images are almost identical.
Yeah, so, you know, we don't know, you know, doing regional comparisons is very important. And that's one of the things I'm really fortunate as I get to work with archaeologists here in Texas, but I do also work with archaeologists in New Mexico and other stuff because I'm dating rock art. And that's, you know, something that people want to know the age of their rock art. So doing those inter-regional, the comparing different regions, both chronologically and stylistically, is something that people are definitely looking at. I would argue that maybe they're not related, but maybe like directly, but maybe they have a shared core of beliefs that, you know, evolved over time as groups developed into different groups. And I'm not probably saying that exactly right, but you know, but there's a lot of interesting things to do there. I agree.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, real quick.
Okay, Karen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
2 questions. Are you going to get to go to Mexico to visit the Huichol?
I'm not. Carolyn are.
Okay, next question then is, do you think, or does Carolyn think that the Huichol will allow that discussion to be videotaped? Or parts of it anyway?
They may videotape it, but I doubt it'll be shared publicly. If it is videotaped, I would assume that it would only be done for, you know, scientific purposes. But I don't know that for a fact. I'm just sort of making an assumption, and maybe I shouldn't do that. I would say that, you know, we have had a Huichol shaman come here and see the rock art, but, you know, this is a long distance. It's a long way to travel. But she's working with people who have ethnographers who have lived among the Huichol and have that trust and that good relationship with them. And it's really, again, it's a collaborative effort. We need people doing all these different lines of learning things to really get at the core of what's happening here. So I don't know that I answered your question, but
Okay, thanks.
Karen, I got one last question. And that is, you explained the length of time it takes you to do the plasma oxidation.
Mhm.
And I even wrote that word down when I was talking to you the other day, as you
Yeah.
recall. No, you wrote it down for me. How long after that, can you then use that specimen for the AMS, the accelerator mass spectrometry?
Okay, so it's the carbon sitting in that little glass tube that I have now. It's all isolated, and then that carbon sitting in that glass tube. And it can stay in that glass tube. It's sealed. And so it can stay in there for a year or two if I, don't have money to send it off, because, I have to pay the AMS lab to do that measurement.
Okay.
But once they get that tube, they have a cute little system. It's called a cracker. They put it in this flexible hose. They pump all the air out, and then they bend the hose, and it cracks open my glass tube. And then that carbon dioxide, gets there. And they can process, if they don't have anything better to do, they can process that sample in a day. But usually there's a line, there's a queue of these samples. And usually it takes me about 1 to 3 months to get a date back from them once I mail them a sample.
And money.
Yeah, it's $350 a sample for the AMS measurement. That's not what we do. That's for just that isotope measurement.
Wow. So your lab is the plasma oxidation lab.
Yes. Yeah. So we're doing all the sample preparation, and we're just sending them that purified carbon for them to do that isotope measurement on.
Am I correct in understanding that your lab is one of the largest of its type in the States?
Yeah, so plasma oxidation was developed for dating rock art. My PhD advisor has a lab in New Mexico that he still operates, but he focuses mainly on ceramics now. And then Ruth Ann Armitage was one of his former students, and she's in Eastern Michigan. And I think she has a 1 sample chamber, but she's really gotten into a lot of really cool research with mass spectrometry on like identifying residues in pots and things like that, because she's an archaeological scientist.
Mm-hmm.
We're really the only lab that's solely focused on using this technique to date rock art. And that was the reason that we built this new instrument, because we knew that there was a lot of need for dating the rock art. And so we built this 10 chamber system that we can do that.
It's really cool.
Thank you. I think it's pretty fun. I'm very lucky to get to do what I love. So.
Karen, has any carbon dating been done on the Panther Cave in Seminole Canyon?
No, it's more difficult to get permissions for state and national park properties. So I don't foresee, also that's a site that's visited by the public. So I don't foresee that happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I photographed it with a 4x5 camera back in '87, and I left copies of those, some of those 4x5 films
Yes,
with you back in 2019.
Yeah, I remember you bringing those by, and I looked at those.
Yeah, well, I remember your tour through your lab. That was, you were just getting it started, basically, or ramping up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good to see the progress you've done.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Is Carolyn or is Shumla still have contact with the shaman that came to visit the site,
The white shaman.
the white shaman site?
I know that for a while she was getting some email messages from a relative because, he only spoke, I guess Huichol, whatever, and like he had a relative that spoke Spanish, because I know she always talked to him like through a translator, because it was like from Huichol to Spanish and Spanish to English, but she had a relative that was emailing him, but I'm not sure currently. I'll have to ask her, but I know that she is in contact with the community.
Mm-hmm. I'll never forget, because I was there and I got to ask him one question. And the question was, is there anything on the White Shaman site, is there anything there that should not be there? Or is there anything missing? And he said, it's all here. And he was crying.
Yeah.
And he said, it's all here. Amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing to me as well. Very powerful. So now we can say Pecos River style is at least 5,500 years old. Isn't that cool, guys?
Do you think it'll go back earlier?
Maybe a little. Geologically, the rock surfaces here are not super stable. We've done some work where we've dated just the oxalate on unpainted walls to see how old the walls themselves are. And the oldest dates I think I have for a wall, just the surf rock shelter wall that is not painted or anything, is about 77,000 or so. So there's potential for, maybe there's a well-preserved site somewhere that will get to radiocarbon date at some point. But it's very different geologically from, say, like some of the sites that they're talking about in like Northern Australia, where those rock surfaces have been around for, 20 or 30,000 years. And so it has to do with the geology here and how long. Now, maybe they painted, because we know that people were here 13,000 years ago, and maybe they painted, but maybe it just didn't survive. But we'll find out as we look at more sites.
Is sandstone more stable than limestone?
It depends. Some sandstone is really hard. And some sandstone is very, what I call friable. It's very loose. Little bugs and things can kind of get in there and dig and stuff. I think it has to do with lots of factors. I don't think it's just the rock substrate. I think it has to do with the water erosion and all kinds of things that are going on in the environment. Any last minute questions?
Thanks for a great presentation.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Absolutely. More.
Thank you. This is all fascinating.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to get to interact with people. I love living in Comstock, but sometimes it's nice to get to interact with people all over. So thank you guys for letting me talk about something I'm very passionate about.